are now
in the paint. It's Pac-12 women's basketball, and we bring you the highlights from the conference every single week. I'm Roz Goldonwede, he's Kevin Dana, and Kevin, take these people through the run of show.
We have our usual stock watch where we take a look at a team in particular and one individual who has really upped her game as of late. We have our game of the week, which will be on TV so you can watch it. But first, let's take a look at the Pac-12 ladder, Roz.
It's February frenzy in the Pac-12 conference, and every team is trying to scrap it out for the best finish possible. And each game is competitive. You know, just this week alone, there were 7 games decided by single digits and 2 games that went to overtime. I think we got to start with the game we told you to watch last week. Washington State went to USC, and it was a good game that came down to the final few minutes.
Roz, doesn't that make us 5 for 5?
I think it does, and I mean, if you're the type that likes to keep count.
Oh, I definitely am the type.
Well, it was a good game, and USC was able to pull out the win against Washington State. However, against Washington, they would not be able to, and Washington would squeak away with that win. However, their travel partner, UCLA, did get the win against Washington, forcing overtime and gritting out a W. Then, against Washington State, for UCLA, it was Markel Walker time. She had a triple-double. First time in 8 years for that program for that to happen, and she had 14 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists.
Hey, Roz, we finally have a new Pac-12 Player of the Week.
That is true. She was the Player of the Week, and the past 3 weeks reigning in on that position was Stanford's Chiney Ogwumike, so some rotation there. Now, I think there's another name that you're going to have to be thinking about and watching out for Player of the Week coming up, and it might be Oregon's Amanda Johnson, because she is back from injury. 2 games back from injury. Against Utah, she had a double-double, and then against Colorado, 23 second-half points, leading her team in the sweep.
I'd say she's healthy, Roz.
Yeah, she's healthy, and she looks scary. And finally, in an overtime game, Cal went to Arizona, and they had the lead early, but they let it slip away. Finally, in overtime, they were able to survive with the W.
Shouts out to Laisha Clarendon. Couple of big steals in overtime and then hit a big shot to put the team up 4 late. It's time for our Stock Watch, Roz, and our team of the week is the Oregon State Beavers for winning 4 straight conference games for the first time in 11 years, and this past weekend getting it done against the Mountain Schools, holding both Utah and Colorado to under 50 points. Now, the past couple of weeks, Roz, we've been shouting out Allie Gibson, and the freshman has been great.
She's solid.
But let's talk about a senior this time.
Okay.
Early Sia Marchbanks having a career-high 22 points to go along with 10 rebounds against Utah in the 13-point victory there, and then 13 points before that in the win against Colorado. So this is the emotional leader of this team, really plays with a lot of enthusiasm, and it's really fun to watch her on the hoop court. Oregon State now, after being a year removed from holding open tryouts just to fill out the roster when Scott Ruick came in his first year, they're now 6-5 in conference and in the top half of the standings. Talk about a turnaround that this team has had. And now, Roz, my mom was a cheerleader at Oregon State when she was in college some 40 years ago or whenever it was. But as she would tell me every time, at home, she would always say, OSU, our hats are off to you. Beavers, Beavers, fighters through and through.
Aw, KD. Hi, Mrs. Dana.
Hey, Ma. Well, enough about a team, Roz. Who's your individual?
Washington's Molly Williams. Who? You might be asking. Well, unless you're a Huskies fan, you might not have heard of her because she's not their star player. But she was a big part of why they beat USC on the road. And for first-year head coach Kevin McGuff, who came from Xavier, he turned that program into one that was nationally recognized. He wants to do the same thing at Washington and carry over a culture of toughness. So I think he saw those pieces of the puzzle coming together. Leading the way for them was Molly Williams. She's a senior for this team, and she brought that veteran leadership, the grit, the toughness to fight it out at the end of the game. And she also overproduced past her averages. So she came into the game averaging about 4 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, and only 16 minutes per game. But against USC, she elevated that. She had 14 points, 11 rebounds. But the stat line isn't everything, because it was more about her effort down the stretch that helped her team pull it out. She was able to secure must-have rebounds. With 5.5 minutes left, she hit the game-tying 3. And then, using hustle, she got big steals. And finally, iced the game with an offensive rebound with 10 seconds left, making sure USC did not have another chance to score. So as you're rebuilding a program, KD, the difference between being a good team and moving into being a great team, or in those close games, in overtime, or in those final few seconds, how you pull it out to get the W, it often does come down to role players like Molly Williams stepping up.
Molly Williams certainly had a big impact in their victory over USC. It's time to look forward now. What's our game of the week this weekend coming up, Roz?
It's actually a weekday game. Thursday, UCLA at Cal. Two teams that are fighting for second place, right, Katie?
This is going to be a huge battle come Pac-12 tournament time as far as seeding is concerned. If UCLA wins this game, they will not only be in a tie for second with Cal, they will also own the tiebreaker over Cal because they beat them earlier in the year. So this is a game that if these teams finish tied for second, well, they'll face each other in the semifinals of the Pac-12 tournament if everything plays the seed. Okay. If they finish tied for third, that's going to be a huge difference because UCLA would get that 3 seed and Cal would get the 4th, which means that if everything played the seed, Cal would face Stanford earlier in the Pac-12 tournament, and that is a team that you want to avoid facing as long as possible.
For sure, with Stanford being the number 4 team in the country, undefeated in the conference, looking very strong. You'd like to see them at the end. All right, well, what are the keys to the game then?
Well, I'm going to point out a player on each team in particular that you wouldn't necessarily think is going to have a huge impact, but will definitely have a big say in the outcome of this game. And for UCLA, it's Corinne Costa, because Cal has a ton of bigs on their team that we all know how good they are rebounding the basketball, one of the best teams in the country, let alone the conference. And Corinne Costa is really their one true post that they start. They don't have a lot of depth down low. They do have a 6'3" Casey Swain coming off the bench, but it's really going to be up to Corinne Costa to stay out of foul trouble in order to try to keep up with those Cal bigs. And she's not going to give you the biggest stat line, but she is going to be very solid. She leads the team in blocks, and she's going to have to be able to stay on the floor. Then, for Cal, talking about Lindsay Sherbert. This is a Cal team that doesn't shoot the 3 all that well, and UCLA certainly defends it very well. But Cal's Sherbert leads the team with 33% three-point shooting, and she is going to have to be able to knock down some shots so she can open up that Cal offense. And you know Brittany Boyd doesn't need a lot of space to work with.
No, she's good in motion. And Sherbert will open it up. She's their designated gunner.
But if Sherbert is able to hit a very efficient amount, then Boyd's going to get all that much more room to work with.
Team effort. Everybody has to do their little piece so that everyone else can step up and have a good game.
Certainly. It's going to be a great one, Ross.
Well, folks, that'll do it for us in this week's episode of In the Paint. Episode 6 will be coming to you next week. But until then, we would love to hear from you. So if you've got questions, feedback, if there is a team or a player you think we should be talking about, tell us, and we'll make that happen for you. He's on Twitter at Kevo408. I'm at Rosgo21. And thank you for watching. We'll catch you next week.